Hello, heroes. It is I once more, OmnusI, Master of the Lair of OmnusI, here with another State of the Dungeon address. The date today is the 13th of April, 2017, and we have concluded another session of our Werewolves of the Caribbean. Again, Werewolf the Apocalypse. The idea is that many of their exploits are going to take place in the Caribbean, but at the moment they're still up around Plymouth, the power base of the Silver Fangs, as are related to Aiden Whitepaw, the Arun leader of the pack for the Silver Fangs. And the last session was mostly about building up. They had one more obstacle. They had an obligation to a spirit that they had to go out to the Hudson Bay and go skinny dipping for a few hours to basically to pay off a debt, which they had agreed to and they had every intention of doing. So while the preparations were underway to make a stealth moon bridge to drop them off close to where the Phoenix Dagger was, without alerting the Guardians, including the Raven Queen's priestess, who had the dagger in her possession, they were to instead take a trek along to finish their obligation. And they chose to do so by using their ship. Now, the one of my traditions in gaming is when a player has a birthday, I generally try to give them a birthday present. It's usually a minor item that does not skew the game balance, but gives them something nice that they can use as a character in my games. It doesn't cost me anything, so hey, I'm cheap. So, the player of Nikolai had his birthday and wanted his gift to be for the Werewolf the Apocalypse game, which is good. I like giving out fetishes for Werewolf the Apocalypse because they're personal and they will stick with a player for the rest of that career for that character. With D&D, oftentimes you have this upgrade experience where you just eventually find something that's better than what you may have gotten for your birthday the year prior, and then that item gets replaced. So I don't like to do that as much, so he asked for that. And considering his circumstances, he has a pet familiar water octopus-like spirit, and he lost a hand in his rite of passage, so he's got a minor fetish hook instead. It fits the pirate theme. I thought I'd help him out because he every once in a while bemoans the fact that his character is crippled. So his character was going to get back into approximation with the their ship, in case you forget, is actually also the storage vessel for the powerful Celestine umbral spirit Kraken, which is a spirit of nightmares. And they have it bound into their ship. They have an amulet that gives them some control over the creature, but by and far its most damaging effect is that it's been kind of weaseling into Nikolai's brain. His status as a young, untrained theurge has made him particularly susceptible to its call. The visage of the creature is not unlike that of Cthulhu. In fact, its presence will eventually spawn the kind of ideas and dreams that will lead to the Lovecraftian mythos and a lot more of those New England writers and their dark horror. So, in preparation of all of that, I changed the elemental spirit that he had into more of a Cthulhuing little humanoid body and tentacles on the mouth and such, and made him a little creepier. The rest of the players noticed that he could also materialize. Gave him a little bit of extra power as a foretaste for what Matt was going to get, for my player was going to get for his birthday. So, as he cross-examined the familiar, he found out that he was able to transform into a blade and a new hand for him in his crippled hand. The blade itself was a decent enough fetish weapon that was capable of doing aggravated damage, but almost as importantly, it also gave him a fleshy, tentacle-fingered hand, which gave him some more utility, made him feel a little bit better about the hand thing. In general, he took it pretty well, although again, I'm playing the creature as being kind of dark. They had kind of chased that idea round and round and found out that the ship is kind of waking up. The bonds that are holding the Kraken in place are not doing so well. So the players tried rolling to do a rite of binding to kind of keep it quiescent. And the bad dice rolling for the night really started to roll. Again, I hate to use the idea that they're cursed, but there were an awful lot of ones rolled tonight. It's amazing some of them survived, honestly. If this had been a big capstone night for a chronicle with a lot of combat, there could have been some casualties. So they almost woke up the thing, trying to put it to sleep. The whole time, too, the kind of twisted, familiar spirit was kind of trying to goad him into waking up the giant Kraken spirit that they were actually riding on top of. Fortunately, though, they finally got their acts together. They did enough of a good binding that the thing slept a little bit deeper. It retracted its hold on the umbral spirit of the ship and reduced itself. So that made them feel a little bit better about things. The trip was very quick. Vlad decided he wanted to take a hand at steering the ship, and he did a fine job. Rolled well, he has the skills. It's good to see. It's not just all piling up on Nikolai. Eventually, they got to the bay. There was banter to be had along the way. I'm not going to bore you with the details. There was a lot of scatological humor and references through the night. Kind of strange how my werewolf games can sometimes drift that way. But for the most part, they got to the bay without too much difficulty. Once they were there, it's their ideas were, well, we have to do it under moonlight, and so we're going to have to wait a while. So I wanted to give them some combat to shake things up a little bit, especially since the prior night had all been about getting prepared for their great mission. So basically what I had was a group of Wendigo who took the spirit, the Kraken, as an affront, as Wendigo are used to confronting powerful spirits, including many worm spirits. The fact that this thing didn't radiate of the worm, it's actually from Deep Umbra, it has no affiliation with the worm. It didn't matter to them. They attacked. There were 5 Wendigo that got up onto the ship and were attacking. There were 5 more in a canoe near the ship that were attacking. And a mixed bag of the different auspices and things, but I threw in enough to give them what I thought was a challenge. Only a few of them realized something was really off. It was at first Vlad and Aiden and Nikolai realized that there was a problem. Vlad tries to go over to the Umbra, or into the spirit world, and he doesn't roll particularly well, but just well enough. So he slowly goes through. The Wendigo have plenty of time to notice that he's coming through, and when he pops over, they've got spears at his throat, saying, "You even so much as twitch, and you're skewered." He surrendered and was bound using a ritual bind that the Wendigo had to make him not dangerous. While that rite was on, he couldn't change form, he couldn't do a great deal. So the others come through, finding out, well, they peeked and saw that, oh, that wasn't good. So they came over, and they began to talk to the Wendigo first. Please stop stabbing our spirit. It's asleep now, but you're going to wake it up. And nobody wants that. Oh yeah, one other example. I've got to backtrack a little bit. As they were leaving, it was time to, control the Kraken. And the character who held the Kraken was the party's leader, Aiden. Well, Aiden doesn't have a lot of experience with otherworldly horrors, and he was temporarily subdued when he tried to control the Kraken. So the Kraken was free, and it started to go towards a sense of, well, it started to go towards the shore, which scared them all. So there was a general melee for the amulet to control the Kraken. The first person who picked it up was Nathan, the Geta Fenris. He grabbed it and held it just long enough to pass it over to Nikolai, their Theurge. He was kind of messed up from the experience. Nikolai grabbed it, and all of a sudden he started moaning, "The hunger, the hunger!" He could tap into what the Kraken was throwing down, but he couldn't control it. He botched his roll pretty badly. So it was heading closer and closer to the shore. Eventually, Peter, who generally tends to have some clutch rolls when needed, got over to it, tapped into it, made enough of a roll to find out what was going on. And by that time, they all had to brace for impact because the ship was rapidly getting close to the shore. And to their amazement, it crested the shore and was hovering over the ground, purely on the power of Leviathan. And it flew towards the village alongside the harbor, sleepy little place, basically just fishermen, and it nommed the village, carved a swath of destruction, and ate the people as it plowed through them. Eventually, Peter was able to get the ship under control and set it back into the harbor so that they could leave. But it did leave a lot of destruction, and again, that's going to cement in the mind of the locals this mystery of this giant creature that rose out of the water like some eldritch abomination god, swept across and created a swath of destruction. Because I like the poeticness of it. So anyhow, they're getting attacked by Wendigo in Hudson Bay now. Fast forward it to the present in my story. And they managed to talk. They could shift to wolf speech. And the Wendigo said, "We're going to destroy this abomination." And Aiden's like, "That would actually be really nice, because this thing is scaring me a bit. But I don't think you've got enough Guru here to do it." Which the Wendigo took as an insult. Again, Aiden tried to roll to say that without insulting them, and it didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. So two of the Guru start frenzying and going after Aiden. Now these are Guru patterned after player characters with a little bit of experience, so they're tough fighters. They're not maxed out, but they're tough. Aiden relies on his natural soak ability and his combat skills, and he decides that he's going to not use his Fang Dagger, and then takes an aggravated wound, realizes that they mean business. They're going to try to kill him, so he pulls out his Fang Dagger. Now we find out that with a Fang Dagger, you can either use your rage and go slashy with it, or you can draw upon the spirits inside the blade, activate it, which you can only do once because you're making a Gnosis roll instead of a Rage roll, and you can't do both of them in the same round, as it turns out. And you would double the successes for damage dealing that you would do with that particular weapon. It's a broken weapon for the amount of damage that it can do, completely outstripping many people's ability to have reasonable chances soaking that kind of damage. So he stabbed one of them, didn't do a great deal of damage, but significant. It should have slowed him down if he hadn't been raged. The Theurge for the Wendigo went up and heal, which kind of showed the party what it felt like. I mean, they rely on their Theurge healing them through fights all the time. So now this group had a Theurge who was going to keep his frenzying packmates alive. One in a rune, the other one a Philodox. So by this time, Aiden had spent rage to try to dodge and fight, The problem was two angry Guru, caring nothing about dodging, were now shredding him. And very quickly he started taking more wounds. Not as many as quickly as you might think, however. My dice were fairly cold. On the other hand, so were his. Matter of fact, there was a widespread, just a malaise of poor dice rolling through the whole thing. It made the combat somewhat painful and stretched it out far longer than I would have liked it to have gone. This was mostly intended to be a diversion. Now, at the same time, as it turned out, Nathan had ran out of Gnosis. He didn't have enough to even go into the Umbra anymore. So he was stuck in the material world, which kind of changed the balance of my plans. I planned for them to go to the Umbra to save their spirit creature against these well-meaning Wendigo. And I was prepared for it to go into a combat. This campaign, this chronicle, is a little darker than many of my usual ones. And for the most part, my players don't like to kill other Guru. Playing in modern day, because there just aren't enough of them anymore. They have to be pretty vile to want to kill them. In this case, they're the Native Americans fighting against the white Europeans. The Wendigo weren't really willing to back off at all, and quite honestly, the rest of the group weren't opposed to spilling a little Native American blood either. But half of my group couldn't get over to the Umbra, or couldn't get over fast enough. So instead I rang in some kinfolks, brave warriors, who came up with spears over the side of the deck and started attacking the crew, which I thought would have been fairly useful and a good idea for the Guru to involve their kinfolk in on this fight. So a few spears were thrown. I believe Peter was injured somewhat. He hadn't gone over. Grace was missed, Grace, the GM NPC Bonar, and I believe Nathan took a slight blow. So they got their weapons ready and were ready to start carving through some of these braves, and Grace went early because she's a little slip of a thing who's quite quick and clever, and she realized that they weren't Guru. She had no reason to go up to to start clawing them. So she went up to Krynos, she started grabbing them and throwing them overboard with, the idea of throwing for distance so they weren't going to come back anytime soon or might get hurt enough that they wouldn't try attacking anymore. This tactic worked rather well, but unfortunately it really only worked well for her. While every time she tried, she generally grabbed somebody and threw them, even though she only has 5 dice for the dice pool. Which is less than most of the others have in their abilities. I didn't fail once with her. Every time, every action she had, she ended up chucking another attacker into the waters of the bay around them. The rest of the group tried fighting as well. The crew were getting weapons to repel boarders, so they weren't in the fight, and basically they knew that if the Guru were getting into a fight, they didn't want to be into it too. Remembering that they're all kinfolk from Bonars that they had picked up as crew. So they fought. It was a big fight. But again, it was mostly came down to Grace would chuck people, and the others tried, didn't do so well, so they pulled out weapons. I believe Peter ended up still throwing some people off. Nathan pulled out his big cleaver weapon that is special to his tribe, and he chopped down one of the braves before the rest of the fight was basically a moot point. Once it was over in the Umbra, the Wendigo gone, the mortals who were fighting just didn't have anything left for them. So at this point, the pack leader was getting shredded by a pair of Wendigo. He would deal out some damage, but then the Thayers would come back and heal it, and he was trying to dodge some of the incoming fire, so he wasn't killed right away, which meant he wasn't attacking and putting down his opponents as quickly. So it really was a no-win situation at that point, seemingly. And then Nikolai attempted to do a lot of things at once. First of all, he had his little spirit friend try to free Vlad, who was still tied up after the ministrations of coming over first and getting subdued. Well, it turns out he couldn't break through the ritual binding. He needed to cut the cord, and he just didn't have cutting in his nature. So instead, he ear-sexed him with his tentacles and told him, "Oh, don't worry, we'll get you out of here." By the way, isn't Nikolai really cool? So then he transformed into a sword. Nikolai went over, freed him, rolled pretty well. There was a chance it was going to devour him. And he then found out one of the abilities of his new sword was to absorb gnosis if he put it or used it to break an enchantment. In this case, the ritual of binding. So he's like, oh, cool, more gnosis is never a bad thing. And he went into the fight. Well, he thought the Theurge was the first problem because, well, he was undoing all the damage. So he was going to focus his attention on him. Aiden finally rolled like the player for Aiden can sometimes roll. He rolled a really good hit. I rolled a really poor soak. And using my fun little hit location die, it was a headshot, and he lopped off the character's head. So one went to go down. Nikolai comes through, and since the Theurge had tried healing, he didn't spend rage, so he didn't have a dodge. So he rolls. Great roll. Great damage. I didn't soak hardly anything. The Theurge had been shot by Vlad. When Vlad stood up, he shot him with his pistol and actually did some damage. The shot from the cutlass pretty much ended the fight for the Theurge, and he was down and he was dead. He was close enough to dead. I just let him die. In truth, I think he would have only been incapacitated, but it was more dramatically appropriate for him to just die. Then Aiden turned around, and by this time Aiden was crippled. He was only up by spending willpower to stay upright. And he was dueling with the last one, the actual rune of the group. Again, turned out that by him just attacking Aiden, left him wide open, and another cutlass blow from behind took down the rune as well. So Nikolai got a couple of kills with his birthday weapon. So that was good for him. At this point, though, the rest of the group were... things had pretty much died down. There were two more Garou who could have jumped into the fight. They were also part of the deck crew, but the whole whirlwind of combat was over so quickly that they didn't have a chance to intervene. This time, Aiden used his diplomacy and said, look, we can kill you, or you can take the bodies of your fallen and leave. They chose to leave. And the fight pretty much ended at that point. The other Garou who were in the water, first of all, Nikolai had the idea, since he had his hands on the amulet of control, he thought he would use one of the tentacles and sweep the deck to take out the enemies. And all he managed to do, because he didn't roll well for that, all he did was manage to wake up a side tentacle, which smashed the canoe, and the Kraken ate the Garou. So it's eaten 5 Wendigo now. And because it learns new abilities when it does that, now it's got little white hairs on the head, and it's really good with cold, as well as being a Kraken. So that's going to be interesting. And so yeah, the Wendigo depart with their wounded and dead. The rest of the group does their skinny dipping. The only thing of any note, again, a little scatological humor, Nikolai ended up using his familiar as a hagfish, if you know what a hagfish is, to do vile things to Vlad, because Vlad was being uppity. Now, as you may have heard before, Nikolai and Vlad are father and son, so they kind of needle each other. It's funny. It doesn't get distracting. It's just, you know, a little banter. Banter's never a bad thing. So he used his familiar spirit to make him uncomfortable, and they got back on the boat and went back. As the time had elapsed in the evening, that fight took 2.5 hours because of just terrible dice rolling. And I think the group in general wasn't all that tight and focused. There was a lot of extracurricular talking and everything. It may take a bit longer than it should have. But the group went back to Plymouth. They went back to the White Paw Estate. They got in touch with the elders who were getting ready to do the Stealth Moon Bridge for them. They ended up learning a few new gifts. Several did. Kept advancing on learning rights that they had access to. And for the most part, they should be 100% ready to go on the Moon Bridge. Next time we play, they should be off into the Umbra, ready to go. Little foreshadowing, a little warning about the dangers of traveling on one of these stealth moon bridges. It's done in the new moon when the moons are the weakest, so the bridge is the least stable and it's going to be narrow and dim. Surely nothing bad can happen. Maybe. We'll see. But anyhow, that's where we ended up. The guys got 4 character points for the night, which they don't believe they've spent really yet. So we'll see. That is the end of this State of the Dungeon address. Next week is, of course, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, Dark Days at Stoneholm. The party is, I believe, going off after some goblins in their warrens. So that should be entertaining. I hope you've enjoyed this State of the Dungeon address. I am OmnusI once more. And thank you for watching me. And I bid you safe travels.